Tiffany, welcome to the show. You are an autistic Black advocate, an activist, a parent advocate, and the writer and creator of Nigh Functioning Autism, an inclusive platform and community for disability advocacy. Today, we're going to discuss a variety of topics related to Black and Brown disabled people, ranging from education to neurodiversity and police violence. To help us understand this universe of important issues, the first thing I want to discuss are actually the harmful stereotypes about neurodivergent and disabled Black and Brown people that exist inside and outside of the community. So my first question is, what are some of those damaging stereotypes, and how do they impact Black people and Brown people within their families, their close circle of community members, their church? How does this manifest?
So, first of all, a lot of the stereotypes that we might see within and outside of our racialized communities would be like our behavior is akin to the behavior of people that are on drugs or are scary. Just the way some autistic people move or have a lack of body control. Um, a lot of people from within and without just think that that person is like somebody to fear. And of course, that's dangerous when you think that somebody is, looking like they are scary to you. And if you have the power of having a weapon, well, then that's of course dangerous. Some of the stereotypes that I get within the Black community, just from having different interests
Mm-hmm.
than a lot of people within my own racialized community. Um, like I'm trying to act white, or I'm trying not to be a part of the rest of the racial group, because a lot of times our interests are just so disparate
Mm-hmm.
from our own communities. So that's an example of within and without side of the community.
And sort of my follow-up question is sort of relating to racism and ableism outside the community, because now that we have sort of an understanding of how some of these stereotypes sort of look, and that it can manifest in this fear, how do those same racist and ableist stereotypes play out in the workplace, or in a classroom, or in public spaces predominantly around white folks in white spaces?
Well, in the workplace, it can be extremely hard because there's this office politics kind of culture. And a lot of neurodivergent people don't even fit into the cultures they were brought up in. So there's no way to easily learn the deeply mired, complex, complicated politics of work culture, because all that brings in is like all the adult issues. You got like money, jobs, um, stereotypes, all that stuff that you would have to be taught like very specifically. A lot of neurodivergent people just don't pick up on, and it causes a lot of problems, a lot of contempt in the workplace from my experience.
Hmm.
A lot of people like to make up stories where they don't see that you're fitting a specific stereotype, or you're not fitting in some way, so they make up their own like stories about you in their heads.
Wow.
Yeah.
and just sort of like trying to draw connections to certain things that they haven't even asked, they haven't even, gathered
Exactly.
the information to even, you know your name, let alone trying to construct your whole identity and background.
Exactly. Like a lot of the office politics are like, um, you have to go to such and such happy hour. Well, if somebody doesn't like to drink, maybe
Mm-hmm.
they won't go to the happy hour, but nobody told them the happy hours are where people go to build office culture and gossip and do things that are have nothing to do with alcohol. But nobody told you that, so you're not going to go. But for me, a lot of times people thought I was stuck up because I
Wow.
wasn't like intermingling, but I just didn't know.
Wow. And
Yeah.
I mean, those are those moments where, I mean, like on top of that building of culture, these are also those critical moments where employers will use that as sort of a reference to determine who is worth the promotion and who fits in and who actually fits in with this company. And I actually want to sort of go back on this subject about school in the classroom, because now that we're sort of talking about how it manifests at work, I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into the way that this works in our education system, because you've talked about the way that our education system has failed disabled Black and brown kids, and on your page you had a post about this topic where you said people act like students aren't aware they are being excluded from being properly educated, like they don't know the path set by society's low excuses for standards aren't their curriculum, while non-disabled students get to pick and choose subjects. And I find this quote so powerful because, one, it highlights how often our institutions ignore disabled students as if these students can't even tell that they are being mistreated, and two, it reveals how often our institutions and leaders don't even realize that they can do better. So what are some important ways our education system continues to fail these students?
Ooh, this could be like 300-hour long episode. Um, but I'll start with kids that start off with a language or sensory hearing or speech difference are often not taught, period. Their educational civil rights are broken every year that they're going to school, every day that they're going to school. They're they're not being taught how to communicate without speech. So a lot of autistic kids and adults may never learn to speak, but that does not mean that they can't understand. They can't be taught to communicate. But the way our society works today is people who are educationally different are herded into classrooms that are really geared for like pre-K kids. But this goes on all the way through age 21. There's never an increase in uh, challenge in the curriculum. And when you get people who are 21 and have no skills, what are they supposed to do? And then we say disabled people can't do certain things, but that's because they're excluded from education, the same education that everybody else gets. They're excluded completely throughout their entire educational history.
Wow. And so, like on that note, I wanted to then go into some of the solutions for this failed education system, since it's so all encompassing, and since, you know, this is a case of people who almost just feel like the solutions that they have in place are totally sufficient. I wanted to bring up another quote of yours where you said that independence doesn't mean without help. And I really appreciate this message because it's a reminder that so many of the ways that we try to help disabled and neurodivergent people are incredibly patronizing, and they aren't always solutions that disabled people have asked for. So my question is, what solutions do disabled and neurodivergent Black and Brown students actually need? Like, what does an inclusive, an ideal, or just even a more accessible education look like?
So starting at the very beginning with the training of all the educators, the therapists, and all the medical staff out there. They need to be trained properly. They need to be trained what autism is and what disability is. They need to be made aware of disability culture and how ableism manifests in the way they are teaching, the way they're doing therapy, the way they're diagnosing. So that's just the very first step. Um, Next is making communication like the number one priority. So a lot of times kids are in school at age 3 if they have some sort of like language or speech delay, or if they notice something like that. Instead of making speech the main goal, communication should be the main goal. Not everybody is going to be able to speak, and speech is not a better form of communication. Um, my best form of communication is through writing. That's my most reliable. That's where I know I'm going to say exactly what is on my mind. I can get it out. I can slow down enough. Um, Writing and a speech generating device, all those things should not be considered like speech alternatives. They should be considered just as good as speech. And then we wouldn't have so many people um, who are behind in language just because they're behind in speech. Those don't have to be the same thing. So if you consider that speech is a physical disability, but most people still have the same thoughts, desires, dreams, goals, but them not being able to speak it does not mean they don't deserve to have it, just like everybody else. Same with their education.
Wow. I mean, as somebody who went to San Francisco State University for communication, um, I always admired the way that a lot of communication uh, majors and educators talked about communication in this perspective that, the value isn't about trying to have the perfect words to sound the most eloquent. The value is just to be able to communicate with other people, to and to be able to efficiently communicate with people across different cultures, across different languages, because that's what's really difficult is, um, being able to articulate your words is one thing, but being able to really express how you feel in a way that another person can understand, and being able to also listen to them and also be able to like interpret how they are communicating their message, that's such a complicated thing. And I'm glad that you sort of brought that up. Um, Now, switching gears, I also wanted to go ahead and hear some of your thoughts on a definitely more potentially triggering but necessary topic for our readers, which is police violence against Black and Brown disabled people. As we discussed earlier, the intersection of racist and ableist stereotypes can have a really huge impact on these people inside and outside the community. And many of the people who act on these harmful stereotypes will assume that disabled people are being violent or being aggressive. And so they'll call the police on someone who actually needs help and support. So, what can you tell us about the unique experience of this sort of dual identity of being Black and Brown and also being disabled when it comes to police violence?
I would say that it feels like it's not only desperate, it feels like a situation that doesn't have a good solution, because even if the officers are trained in autism or trained in different disabilities, it's who they're going to use that training for. If they think a Black person is on drugs just because they have that bias, but they're just doing what autistic people do, stimming, which is like um, certain ways the body moves, then it's not going to matter what bias training they had, because you can't train out racism, and those bias and disability trainings don't work except for um, well, they don't work for Black people or brown people in general, period.
Yeah.
So there's really no point in doing like autism training or anything when, if it's a Black person, they're still going to take that as that person's on drugs or that person's being aggressive.
Wow. And so in in sort of painting this picture of what it's actually like to um, experience this, I would love to know sort of what is a better path forward. If we could uh, successfully defund the police and reallocate funds to actually support communities, and also have those funds to support specifically Black and Brown, disabled, and neurodivergent communities, what ideas or laws or community resources or cultural changes have you or other similar activists would like to see?
Well, I have seen something in, I think it was California, but I'm not really sure, where instead of dialing 911, um, the public would dial 988 or something for someone they assumed, instead of dialing 911 for someone they assumed had a mental health breakdown or was disabled in some way, they would dial this number, and the police wouldn't come. It would be experts in psychology and social services.
Hmm.
So I believe that is a very, probably the only way I can think of, because I've tried other ways, and everything else, as you've seen in the news, there's nothing really we can't get shot for. So I mean, there's really no idea I've had that has worked really for anybody else. Like deaf people, people who use devices to speak, they will always have to reach for something to communicate to the police for. And if they don't communicate to the police get very angry because then they're being non-compliant. So I really have I have no ideas, because there's nothing that they can do on either way that will solve their problem, except for if somebody is dispatching a different type of service worker.
Mm. Wow. And so it's just, I mean, it really just goes into how any solution can't just be one, you know, one new service or one new hotline, but it has to be, a top to bottom cultural shift. It has to be a political shift. It has to be an institutional shift. Going on the same path of looking for ways that we can actually progress from here. My last question of the day is actually about helping Black and Brown, disabled, and neurodivergent people. Something that you had mentioned on the Nigh Functioning Autism page is the importance of finding out how to help a person from their perspective, because oftentimes, the shit that non-disabled people do as a form of helping might not actually be helpful, or it could actually be detrimental. So taking this into consideration, how can we find out how to help a person from them? Like, what questions should people be asking disabled and neurodivergent people Or what questions should we be asking for ourselves and interrogating about ourselves?
For one, I would say, well, actually, let me ask you a clarifying question.
Mm.
When you mean help, like specifically, do you mean like making policy or just like daily help?
Oh, I guess that's a good question. I guess I guess we can ask it in both regards. Like, if say for example, there's a coworker or there's an employer who wants to help an employee or someone out there, who's a coworker, or if you're talking from a policy level and you have politicians who are like, hey, I want to help this community member or this community. And I don't want to just pass a policy thinking that it's going to help them. Like, how would they actually go about communicating with them and figuring out what needs to be done?
So when it comes to policy, I would say that they should have at least 20 opinions from people who have a stake in it. So the people who help the disabled people themselves, um, the people who work in the industry, because there's a lot of overlap in those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed like the not only the autistic community, but like the disabled community in general is a little, I don't want to say severed, but there's a lot of different factions.
Mm-hmm.
There's of course, a lot of different opinions. So anybody who's making policy needs to talk to a wide range of people, just to make sure that everything is feasible. Thing, things are not stepping on other people's toes. And when it comes to like just daily things, so of course, ask the person.
Mm-hmm.
If they can't answer, you would definitely talk to somebody who knows them very well. Always keep it in your head that some of these caretakers, these parents, grandparents, siblings, don't always have the person's wants and needs in their recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they have their own wants and needs instead of the disabled person's. So always take their recommendations with a grain of salt.
Wow. Well, Tiffany, it was honestly an honor having you on the show, and in just
Thank you.
the brief time that we've sort of discussed, I got a much more in-depth look in how you think in sort of the different ways that we can improve as our community. I know everyone listening will probably walk away with a lot of different nuggets of wisdom. But before we say goodbye to our audience, what are you working on these days, and where can the LLAG community find and support you?
Um, so these days I'm actually trying to um, make some big changes to education in this country, to education for disabled kids. So I would like to have a big march or protest very soon. And everybody can find me at on Instagram at nigh.functioning.autism, at Nigh Functioning Autism on TikTok and on YouTube.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely go ahead and link all those out so everyone can go ahead and support you. Tiffany, thank you again,
Thank you.
and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.